Okay, well, I thought we'd start by doing a quick introduction of everyone. We'll start with the people on Zoom. If everyone's unmuted now and can hear me. Emily, you want to start?
I'm Emily Miller. I'm here because Sam is such a good teacher. I've taken his poetry class, and I'm looking forward to discussing Hemingway and T.S. Eliot's Wasteland. I'm anxious to hear what all of you have to think about it.
Well, I'm very excited to be here as well, and I can't wait. I think we're gonna wait until the third session before we get to the Elliot. I'm not sure we're gonna have time today.
Okay, well, that'll be another course.
But yes, we'll get to it. Sharon.
Sam, I am here because in my 20s, I was a big aficionado of Hemingway, and because I think you're a wonderful teacher. So that's why I'm here.
Thank you, Sharon. And that's good that you have a little expertise yourself, because I'm here to learn from all of you as much as I am to lead the discussion today. So, excellent, Judy.
Well, I am here because I was born and raised in Florida. And when I was about 12 years old, my father took my mother and I to Cuba. And I got to go to Sloppy Joe's, where Hemingway hung out, and the Hotel Nacional. And the Cuban people were so friendly, but they kept saying to my father, "You better hold on to her because she looks like a little Cuban girl and we're going to steal her." But it was it was the year before Batista left and Castro came in. It was really fascinating. And I'll never forget, Batista had solid gold faucet and handles in his bathroom.
A friend of mine emailed me and when he heard I was teaching this course, and there's still a Hemingway look-alike contest once a year at Sloppy Joe's.
It was a great place.
And if they don't look like Hemingway, the people that are in the contest. Let's go around Dick.
Okay, I'm Dick Tettelbaum. I'm a amateur historian, I guess. And I've always been fascinated by World War I in general and the post-World War I period in America in particular, being one of the worst times in American history before now.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. There is, in reading about the First World War and like the aftermath and modernism in general, I was kind of like, wow. You know, a lot of it is history repeating.
And it's not over.
And it's not over, exactly. Go.
I'm Ann Rosenwald, and I was an economics major. Literature is not my forte, and I took this class to push my brain in a different direction. So I didn't like what I've read so far. So this is intentionally pushing me to think in a different way.
Sure.
Hi, everybody. I'm Frank Corallo, just a lifelong reader, big Hemingway fan, and this has to be the fourth or fifth time I've read Sun Also Rises, so I'm just interested in seeing if I get some new angles on it.
Does it get any less depressing with numerous
In a perverse way, the sadness of it, I find kind of uplifting somehow.
Okay. That's interesting. Okay.
I'm Suzanne Sanders. I am doing this partially because I know Sam's going to have some interesting stuff to say, and partially because Hemingway's one of those people that I get really mad about. And I figure if there's something that makes me that mad, I need to study it a little closer.
Suzanne will be my, like, I would say right hand, my left hand to this course because I'm not sure I have the pipes to lecture for a long time, but I think between the two of us, we'll handle it just fine. Well,
I'm Will Dennehy. As an aspiring writer, top 10 writers with Sam, I've been overly influenced by Hemingway. Been trying to break away from him for years. And
hard to do with the writer, isn't it?
yes, and so I know it's a different poem, but I'm hoping Sam will tell me the women walk, what the women who walk to and fro, speaking of Michelangelo, actually means.
Not a damn thing.
I'm Peggy Gunderman. I'm in the writers group with Will, Sam, and Sharon. And I'm here for two reasons, primarily for Sam, and also because, like Anne, I did not study a lot of literature. I was a business major, and so I only read what I really had to read in high school. So I want to revisit Hemingway.
All right.
In the corner?
I'm Ron Weber. I've always liked Hemingway. Always been a kind of a fan. Been reading him for years. I've read just about every one of his books. I even have a place in Key West where I go to the Hemingway house all the time down there. But he's a wonderful writer, and I wanted to get a little more deeply into the book and what the meaning of it is. So I'm very curious about that.
Well, I thought we'd start the discussion with thinking about the we have a new Zoomer, Glenna.
Hello.
Hi, Glenna.
Go ahead. Oh,
Introduce yourself, Glenna.
Oh, sorry, I didn't hear the request for introductions. My name is Glenna Heckathorn. I am in the writers group with Sam. I read Hemingway in high school and/or college. I will be very interesting to talk about this book. It's got a lot of politically incorrect stuff in it.
yeah. Very, I don't know. Hemingway is hard to reconcile to current ideas of political correctness, but we'll get to that more in part two, I think.
Okay.
A little more even keeled than part two. Anyway, I thought we'd start the discussion with Jake's, like the reason for Jake's being in the novel and what's his perspective the most is his wound. Is being wounded in the war, and it sort of gives Hemingway the license to talk about the war without really outwardly talking about it. So my first question is why is wounds so effective as a literary device?
Well, because of one reason, because of the tension with, what's her name, Brett, Lady Ashley.
Yeah.
The unrequited, just quite effective.
What do you think is the nature of that relationship? Do you think he's in love with her, or?
I don't think so.
Okay, yeah.
I think he was damaged in the war, and
Yeah.
he can't have sexual relations anymore.
Right.
And I think loves her, but I don't think and he tries to protect her.
Yeah.
But I don't think they can have a sexual relationship.
Oh, exactly. Glenna.
So I think of it as the narrator in the play Our Town is dressed all in black so that they can not have too much impact on the story and be and observe, and that other people will behave around them in ways that are not affected by their presence.
Okay, I want everyone to keep that in mind for when we discuss the wasteland. The idea that like a sexual other can be a narrator and what that has to say about Jake being kind of in between man and woman, like in front, I guess the word being. I want to read a quote from an interview with Hemingway where he actually gets directly into the wound and how it works. Can you read? Yeah. Skip the verb actually.
Here.
Beginning with actually.
Actually, he had been wounded in quite a different way, and his testicles were intact and not damaged. Thus, he was capable of all normal feelings as a man, but incapable of consummating them. The important distinction is that his wound was physical and not psychological, and that he was not emasculated. He thought about that very closely.
Yeah.
If I can add something to what Glenna was saying,
Yeah.
I found Jake to be very reminiscent of Nick in Great Gatsby.
Yes.
He's an observer of the action and he's around it, but he's not in the middle of it.
Yeah. And Hemingway was very much influenced by Fitzgerald. Yeah. Fitzgerald gave him the first galley notes for the book, and a lot of that was cut. According to Hemingway's or according to Fitzgerald's notes. So, how is the wound affecting other relations in the novel? Sharon, do you have your hand up?
Oh, well, I actually didn't mean to have my hand up, but if I can backtrack just a minute to your previous question, I've always felt that if Jake had not been impaired, that Brett would have destroyed him had he been able to function in the way that we think people should function. I think it was a great protection for him because of all the characters, I found her very difficult to engage with. And I just, let me say that about that. And then as to your other question about how the wound affected other relationships, I think it did in some strange way because Jake did a lot of man things. I may be functionally impotent, but I can still fish and I'm still into the bulls and, the guys look up to me. So I think it did in his behaviors manifest in his other relationships.
Anyone have anything to say about that?
Glenna?
So I guess I read some of that as, the narrator is Hemingway, and Hemingway was only willing to go so far in emasculating himself. He wanted to make sure you knew he was still, okay otherwise.
Okay.
Possibly, in a way, I'm jumping ahead here, but he introduces the bullfighter to Brett.
It's a pimp.
It's like he can't perform with her himself, but he presents her with the most manly man that there is around and the one she wants the most. It's sort of an expression of love, but because of the external aspect of it and how it looks to everyone else, he hates himself for it. So it's an interesting tension all the way through the book between what he's able to do and what he is able to live with.
Well, someone refers to him as the pimp.
Yep.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. The eunuch of the harem.
I really want to jump into can we talk a little bit about the wasteland? All of this is really leading to the wasteland. Justin, can you put up the wasteland document that I sent you?
Sure.
Gave me a reason to crack out my big old literature book from college.
Sam, it's called The Wasteland.
TWL.
There we go.
Glenn, you were saying before that the similarity to the Our Town narrator in Black, that he's effective because he doesn't really, or he isn't really skewed one way or the other because he's just when in drama. Is that what you were saying?
Yes, I was saying that it is not being able to perform sexually sort of made him like the narrator in Our Town, who is dressed all in black, so that he doesn't have an impact on the action.
Is anybody around the table or on Zoom familiar with the figure Tyrese? Yes.
Yes.
Yes, we're good.
Yeah, Tiresias was from Greek mythology, had pissed off one of the gods and was made into a woman, and later pissed off another god and got made back into a man. And as a result was considered the wisest person because he knew all aspects of being both a man and a woman.
And he, Suzanne,
Yes.
he was punished because when he was asked who had the most enjoyment from sex, he said the woman. Zeus didn't like that.
If you could read, this is from the very middle of the wasteland, the very heart of the poem. And this is the only fragment of the wasteland where the speaker is actually named. And the speaker here is Tiresias. And the thought is that this is what inspired Hemingway to use Nick and Rodney as the narrator of this novel.
At the violet hour, when the eyes and back turn upward from the desk, when the human engine waits like a taxi, throbbing, waiting, I, Tiresias, though blind, throbbing between two lives, old man with wrinkled female breasts, can see at the violet hour, the evening hour that strives homeward and brings the sailor home from the sea, the typist home at tea time, clears her breakfast, lights her stove, and lays out food in tins. Out of the window, perilously spread, her drying combinations touched by the sun's last rays. On the divan are piled, at night her bed, stockings, slippers, camisoles, and stays. I, Tiresias, old man with wrinkled dugs, perceived the scene and foretold the rest. I too awaited the expected guest. He, the young man, carbuncular, arrives, a small house agent's clerk, with one bold stare, one of the low on whom assurance sits as a silk hat on a Bradford millionaire. The time is now propitious, as he guesses, the meal is ended, she is bored and tired, endeavors to engage her in caresses, which still are unreproved, if undesired. Flushed and decided, he assaults at once. Then we get down to the bottom of the page.
There we go.
There we go.
I can zoom in a little bit if needed to.
Exploring hands encounter no defense. His vanity requires no response and makes a welcome of indifference. And I, Tiresias, have forsuppered all, enacted on this same divan or bed. I who have sat by Thebes below the wall and walked among the lowest of the dead, bestows one final patronizing kiss and gropes his way, finding the stairs unlit. Want me to go on? Yeah, okay. She turns and looks a moment in the glass, hardly aware of her departed lover. Her brain allows one half-formed thought to pass. Well, now that's done, and I'm glad it's over. When lovely woman stoops to folly and paces about her room again, alone, she smooths her hair with an automatic hand and puts a record on the gramophone.
So that scene, Tiresias is able to tell us what's going on without bias, as it were, like the figure in black. The same thing with Jake in the Wasteland. He's put in this position because of his wound, where he's unable to, excuse me, he's unable to be fully a man, but he's also able to narrate Brett and even put her in the position where she's with Romero. So this scene is supposed to have been a big inspiration for Hemingway's use of the wound, which also speaks to the devastating nature of the war in that he's literally unable to form another generation. The generation is lost, like Gertrude said in the very beginning of the book.
Mhm.
Let's go back to Sharon's point about the wound and how it affects other relationships in the novel. Let's try and stick to part one. How else is the wound used as a literary device?
There's a weird way that he he's kind of like the older brother sometimes, when everybody's drinking or fighting or whatever, he'll step in and say, okay, that's enough. And they won't always listen to other people saying that's enough, but they'll usually listen to him. And it's like Tiresias, they keep talking about how female breasts on a man. I cast no aspersions, but we all know that you get a little bit more androgynous as you get older. And the combination of having learned a few things as you go along, it kind of puts him in the mindset of being a little older than everyone else, even though he's the same age. And I think that the overall feeling of the people he's dealing with is not young, it's of being older than their years. And in a way, him having this difference, he's a little step ahead of them, but they're all kind of in the same boat. They're older than young people ought to be at that stage. They should be carefree. They shouldn't be as ironic and dark and brooding and just the hell with it as they are. And I think his wound and the age that it bestows on him, the wisdom of age it bestows on him, comes out through the way that they kind of acknowledge it by following him.
See, it's so funny to me because I look at it so differently.
Okay.
I look at it like they're all a bunch of overgrown children. Like, when are they gonna grow up? They're in their 30s. They should be past all this going to the bar and drinking themselves stupid. And I mean, that's the way I look at it. It's like, he's the only one who's kind of got a real job. I mean, they're writers, so I'm not a writer by personality or instinct. So maybe I just don't have the right personality type to understand them. But I look at them like they're a bunch of spoiled kids.
Yeah, I mean, it's true, but in a way, it's simplistic. I mean, I asked the question, why? You know, why was there a lost generation? And I think it all hinges back on the war. I mean, the war pretty much undermined everything.
But it sounds like Jake's the only one who went to war.
Yes.
So.
He's seen reality.
So he's a little more mature. The rest of them, I mean, I mean, I'm the Vietnam War generation. And even though I didn't go to fight, a lot of people I knew did. And that was kind of smack the stupidity out of you time and grow you up a little bit. So I'm having a hard time with them having lived through the war and still just like, let's just go and drink ourselves stupid.
That's what Vietnam did as well. World War I was devastating. It changed the way society organized itself. Europe became a completely different place. As Fitzgerald said, they handed his world hot and red. I can't remember the exact quote. This terrible place, and expected us to take it in the same way they did in the 1890s. And I think far more than his wound, it's the war that affects these characters. Mm-hmm. They are a lost generation because they no longer have a religion to rely on, a society to rely on. They are lost in space in some ways, very much like our generation was. Whether you went to Vietnam or not, you spent a lot of time trying not to go, because you didn't. And it had a terrific effect. And in many ways, we also had the first generation with the threat of being annihilated by atomic weapons. And I can remember as a child reading all about how you should make bomb shelters and thinking I was going to be dead at any moment and hiding underneath my chair. And I think the war really describes its characters. The wound, I think, is almost superficial. It gives Lenin's approach merit where he can observe, but it's World War I. And the fact that he's the only one who went, that almost all the writers of the 20s, Hemingway was the only one who went. Fitzgerald, he was in Georgia.
Jonathan Hemmingway served there. I think he was an ambulance.
He was handing out chocolate bars to the guy
But
in
he
the
almost lost his
trenches.
legs.
Pardon?
He almost lost his legs.
He did,
Hemingway?
Yeah.
he did while he was handing out chocolate bars. He wasn't fighting in the war, he was a volunteer.
Yeah,
But,
it's a Red
but
Cross.
driving up to the front, you know, I don't care if you're, you know, if you're a med, you're in danger too.
I don't,
No, but just think what he must
You're
have seen.
seeing, yeah, I think that more so.
Just being there.
What he saw as a medic probably
God, I found
affected.
the Army Reserves to be unlivable, and it was nothing like being in a real war.
I just want to make a comment. On that same vein, on the road, Jack Curiax, but it kind of reminds me.
No.
The boss, they don't know what they're doing. They just get on the road and go. They just
Yeah.
have no direction or anything. And that really reminded me of, because that was right after the war too.
Well, wasn't the whole country, America, pretty lost after that war? I mean, the country tried to stay out of it as long as it could. Wilson, we finally got in it, but then Wilson's performance at the peace conference, et cetera, I mean, that almost destroyed civilization in the long run. I can see why people would be incredibly disillusioned.
Can you go into that a little bit more? Wilson's performance, I'm not familiar.
That what?
Can you go into that a little deeper? What do you mean Wilson's performance?
He failed.
The negotiations.
Yeah.
at Versailles.
Yeah, right. Yeah, he failed, he's headstrong, arrogant, et cetera. Wouldn't listen to anybody, particularly the smaller countries that had been fought in the war, and left a mess, left something that the Senate couldn't even pass, or wouldn't even pass. And there was the Palmer, the anti-red scare after the war, the
Yeah.
race riot, pervasive race riots, 1919 on. So even though we didn't suffer war damage, we were damaged nonetheless, psychologically.
Well, there's another thing that happened there is that the American dream, what we all believe in our exceptionalism, changed in World War I. And Europe was devastated. But it was kind of like Vietnam. If you didn't go, you weren't affected. So all the other writers they were worrying about what was happening in small towns like Anderson.
Sherwood Anderson.
Sherwood Anderson. So there was that. I think all these guys who went to France left because they couldn't reconcile the American dream with
Right.
what happened, and they really became unmoored.
What you were saying before about the not being able to talk about the war in the book, really, I think his wound was sort of the vehicle to talk about the war.
He's extraordinarily anti-war.
Yeah.
Basically about farewell arms, but not as much here.
Like-
We're talking about the writing.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, forget the history for a minute.
If I can say one other thing about Jake, he also emerges as the natural leader, so kind of not only the older brother, but also he's the ringleader of all their activities. Just about, he plans the fishing trip, the bullfighting trip, and everybody tags along. So that's another way he is set apart from the rest of the crew in that, they look up to him, they listen to him when he, tells them to stop quarreling, but it's also, he's the one who's driving the action, even though he can't do the action.
What do you mean you can't do the?
Well, because he's, dysfunctional from the wound. So that kind of sets him apart and a certain degree above the rest of the gang.
How is that reconciled in his other relationships, other friends? Like, let's talk about Robert Cullen for a minute, because that's how the book begins. What is Jake's relationship with Robert Cullen?
Yeah. He says he likes him, but he,
Yeah,
Air toleration.
but he barely tolerates him.
that is very interesting. They said at the beginning, I rather like him. He's a good guy. But then I think in chapter 3, he says, I feel I've not been clear about my relationship with Robert Cohen. And then it gets very negative.
He's a jealous man. He's acting like a jealous man. Because he is. In book 1, Robert Cohen is his friend.
Yeah.
But then Brett goes off with him, and he's a jealous man. He's acting like a 16-year-old boy.
Okay, good. So in that moment, he's not the ringleader.
You know. But you picked up, I think, the most interesting thing in this book when this is not a Hemingway typical book, is it? It's long sentences. There's nothing. It doesn't have this staccato rhythm. But almost at the end, he stops the narration and goes, I haven't really told you about Mr. Cohen.
Yeah.
He breaks the fourth wall. And that's the most modern thing, I think, in this book. He gets, I missed it the first 3 or 4 times I read it. I didn't pick that until you asked me to read it again. And I'm going along and go, this is the first time I've ever seen this in a book, where he just stops, turns to the audience and says, I screwed up. Let me tell you about this guy.
Okay.
And I think as a writer, that spoke to me.
Yeah.
As to Robert Cohen as the friend in the beginning, Jake never seemed to have a problem with Brett being with whomever she was in the start of the book or running off with the bullfighter, but he has a problem with Robert Cohen, and that comes out later. And I wonder if that ties into the little threads of anti-Semitism that are strewn throughout the book. He didn't have a problem with the other guys, but he did have a problem with Robert. That was just my take on that.
But do you think that was because he was Jake's friend or because he's Jewish?
I thought it was because he was Jewish, because he lands a few arrows about Jewish people, and they're different from the things he says about Negroes. They're very different. When he uses the word, well, he doesn't say Negro, he drummer. You know, it's a black person who drums, but he really gets into the stereotypical stuff that you hear people say about Jews. He flies a few of those out there. And that's what I wondered, if that was why his issue, or maybe it was because he thought Robert Cohen was really not worthy of Brett.
That's really interesting. He may not have been worthy of Brett in Jake's eyes.
I think there's certainly anti-Semitism there, but Robert Cohen published a novel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
He was athletic. He could beat
Jake
with tennis. He could beat Jake up anytime he felt like it.
Yeah.
He was a man's man. He was everything Hemingway wanted to be. And I think that the anti-Semitism was underlying that, but he was a true competitor.
Yeah, he performed white male masculinity even better than Jake. Yeah, Peggy.
I was just going to say, I thought when I was reading it, that it was Bill who was the most vocally anti-Semitic. He was the one who always had a comment.
Yeah.
And he even said at one point it wouldn't be so bad if he wasn't Jewish. Right. Him having been with Brett. I'm not saying that Jake ever came to Robert's defense with Bill, but Bill was the one who really flinging all the verbal abuse, as in my reading of it.
Now going back to the historical view, I don't know exactly when this novel took place, but it was right around 1924 when immigration for the first time, was a major, not for the first time, was a major issue in America.
It was when they banned.
Yeah, all immigration, but
Yeah.
it was primarily because of immigration from Jewish people from Russia and the
Yeah.
Ukraine and Italians. Were like discriminated against. They were undesirable in the view of many Americans.
Well, most people that came in large groups were undesirable. I don't.
Yeah, but it reached a head in 1924, anti-immigration legislation. The door was shut.
Let's talk about the writing a little bit.
The what?
The writing. You wanted to talk about.
Well, I made my main point. I thought that when he literally just turns and says, somehow I feel I've not shown Robert come clearly. The reason is that until he fell in love with Brett, I never heard him make one remark that would in any way detach it from other people. He says that right in the middle of the dialogue.
Okay.
And it's just like, hey, let me, it's like an actor stepping to the front of the screen just so the rest of the audience, and it just blew me away.
Okay.
But the rest of this book is the least Hemingway of all Hemingway's books, I think. There are 300-word sentences in it.
It's really obvious to me that he didn't write this book in one sitting, which I guess you never do anyway, but passages like that one really say to me that I wrote this book in the moment.
Yeah, when you read about what he says about it, he sat down and wrote this book.
As it was happening, yeah. So what would you call that in as far as like what tense? It's not really all in the past tense.
No, he moves back and forth all the time.
You think so?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, he uses the dialogue to change past and present, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so.
What do you think about the pacing as far as the writing?
There are times when I think he's a tour guide.
Okay. Yeah.
Did this start out as a short story?
I don't think so.
I got the feeling he started out just kind of chugging along, saying what happened, until he figured out where his story was, and then it took off.
Okay.
But the writing through the first book seemed to me very kind of slow, and this happened, and that happened, and this happened, and that happened, and this happened. And it takes off once he gets to Pamplona.
Okay. Yeah.
To that point about, you said short stories, Jake appears in a lot of his short stories. The character called Jake is in a lot of his short stories. So it could have been started that way.
Just a note for everybody on Zoom, we have somebody in the corner here that you can't see probably on the screen. That's where that voice is coming. I think it's interesting your point that the aside seems the most modern thing in the story to you, because to me, considering my focus on Shakespeare, first thing I thought of was how Shakespearean. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting, there are a number of places in the book where I thought, this man's read Shakespeare. And he's taken the good parts from the past and like turned them around and made them fresh again.
Like all good writers.
Like all good writers.
Yeah. Pound wrote a poem called Unpacked in the middle of his career, where it was about like, you know, I've been done with Walt Whitman for years because he wasn't concerned with making new like he thought he was, and then in his older age, he made a pact with women, and he said, all right, now it's time to revisit your catalog and make something new with it. Like he did with Shakespeare. What was that quote?
Somewhere in the book, they're talking about how this seemed like a play. Let me see if I can find it. Not till later on, I don't think. Oh, yeah. I had heard them talking from a long way away. It all seemed like some bad play. And there's a line in Twelfth Night where one of the characters said, if I had seen this acted on the stage, I would think it was an improbable fiction. So it's the same kind of idea, looking at life as if it's on a stage, even in the middle of being on a stage. It's the different layers. And I think that's one of the things that he picked up from Shakespeare, brought to life again.
Something really struck me. They used the word rotten. He said, oh, what a rotten way to be wounded. When you look them up, it reminded me of something rotten in Denmark. What is that from? Yeah. But there are those moments that are very reminiscent of classical literature. Yes.
Well, also, the people he was hanging around with were a lot of English. Being married to an English woman, I can tell you they use Latin a lot.
Wait, so you read English and then she was married to an
Yes,
Englishman?
yeah,
Oh, she was, okay.
I thought she was.
I thought she was
I
American.
think you're right.
No, she was
Given her stilted dialogue, what else could she be?
She's an old chap.
Yeah.
Yeah, to get a little more
Everybody was a chap, right?
Yeah, this chapper.
Really?
It seems like they didn't like the British either. 'Cause
They didn't like-
They didn't like the British either, those guys. They talked about the British and how they acted and things. And several times in the book, they mentioned about the British.
That might have been wartime arrogance. I think the Americans looked at themselves as saviors.
Yeah, could be.
Do you think the Brett being an American has anything to do with his, like you were saying, elder brother status amongst his group of friends?
Maybe that's like the idea of the Americans coming in and saving the day, which is the way we look at it. They don't necessarily look at it that way.
Yeah.
Maybe he's got a little bit of that going on where he thinks he's got to come and clean everything up and, make it all right and get it rolling and all those other kind of things. He is more interested in the practical aspects of everything, how much it costs, who's going to pay, where they're going to go, setting up the cars, all that kind of stuff. Takes care of the practical details a lot.
You think these people were actually having fun?
No.
I don't either.
They didn't remember it. did they?
Yeah, it sounded horrible. Yeah,
They were lost.
yeah.
They were lost.
Yeah, somewhere in there they said, do you want another drink? No, I don't need one.
Oh, yeah.
The drinking, yeah.
Yeah, they weren't drinking because it was fun. They were drinking because they needed to drink.
Yeah, it was
escapism.
Yep.
very intense for me.
And let's go back to your point that it seemed like on the one hand, they were like young and naive. And on the other hand, well, like you were saying, they were all that way because of the war, and they were like old beyond their years. How are those? ideas reconciled in the novel. The idea that they were acting like they were young and reckless, but they were also wise beyond their years, or at least Jake was.
They're very fatalistic and jaded. So, they're frantically doing what should be fun activities, even if they're not really getting a lot of enjoyment out of it, because there's this underlying fatalism behind it because of, either what happened to them or what they observed. And presumably most of that was from the war.
Right.
And everything that happened in the 20s where
Yeah, the whole jazz age.
skirts came up, morals went down.
Yeah,
Um,
it's a reaction to the privation of the war and the cynicism that resulted from that. So it's, all right, if the world's going to hell in a handbasket, let's have fun, while we can. And even if they're not really enjoying it, they're at least going through the motions to convince themselves that they're having fun.
where most of society was battered in the 20s.
Back home in the States, yeah.
I mean, you've got this disaffected group who happen to be writing, so we know about them. But most people were part of the Rotary. And Congress.
Yeah, and what other books were famous in America? Gone with the Wind was written around then too.
Escapism.
Yeah.
But I think your point is really well made, that they're children, and if you look at Fitzgerald, he was always a child. He never really grew up. He was so desperate to be part of the rich, always slightly on the outside, even this side of paradise and Tenders the Night. The people he admires are the unattainable, the people who wreck the world and have someone else clean up behind him. And I think it goes back to losing the American dream. You just don't care anymore. In this book, Brett and Jake and the rich guy, I can't remember his name, drink 3 bottles of rum champagne out to drink. I would be on the floor. Even in my 20s, I would be on the floor to drink a whole bottle.
You gotta build up to that.
That's what they worked at.
That's it, they see professional.
In the last chapter, I think he drank 3 bottles of wine at the restaurant by himself.
Maybe they were a little.
Yeah.
They were hotel room splits.
Let's talk about the rich guy for a minute, the Count Mid-Problem. Brett tells Jake that he's one of us. What does that mean? What do you think? Why is the Count one of them? Or better yet,
Well, he was probably on board from history too. I forget where he was. Was it Greece?
He's Greek.
Yeah, Greece had been a country since the 1850s, but I think he was representative of somebody who came from a place that was totally upset by the war.
yeah.
From some place that actually saw battle and became a country.
Someone who didn't have to work.
Yeah.
Which is
Yeah.
Jake also, in part 1, in describing his wound, the Count, and the gay men that come into the club when Brett appears, he uses the word funny to describe them. Why is that? And going back to your point about irony.
Yeah. This is a super ironic book. I found it useful, the book useful for understanding comments from My daughter's friends and whatnot, they're always making ironic comments. They say the opposite of whatever they actually mean, and it's characteristic. And the people in this book, they do the same thing. They almost never say directly what they mean. They always say something a little either opposite, or they deflect it by saying it's funny. It's not funny. It's not fun. It's hard, weird, strange, unusual, whatever, but they use the word funny to cover all of that kind of stuff. And the young people that do it nowadays, they're kind of in the same spot of things are really in flux right now. It's hard to know who's the expert, who to listen to, that kind of thing. And in this book, they also have that problem. And so the irony comes out. It's like you're hedging your bets. You know, you don't say directly what you think because you don't want to be that exposed, but you also really aren't sure.
Well, doesn't the end of an era encourage that, which we're looking at here, the war, destroyed civilization as it was known. And I think we might be in a period like that right now. It's just gonna, I think, generate a lot of lost people, probably even worse than the war did.
Why do you think that is? That
Fascism is rising again in the world.
okay? I mean, I agree, but why do you think is, or I guess a broader question?
Well, let me put it this way. I think, and somebody alluded to this about the American dream. I think we're looking at another point in time where not only the American dream, but the very concept of America is under close examination, scrutiny, and threat. And I think that was definitely true in the teens and the 20s of World War I. I think we're going through it again. Major power upheavals in the world and belief systems. I mean, even democracy is being questioned as an institution. Just kind of unique in our history.
Yeah.
No, not really.
Yeah.
I mean, vocally unique. The subject of books like this.
Will, you briefly said, I think you said, your comment about women around the period, you said skirts were going up as in,
Walls will go down.
yeah, all right. But how was Brett emblematic of that point in her androgyny? She had short hair like a boy's and wore a jersey sweater.
But a tight jersey sweater.
But she had curves like a racing yacht, and you could tell in that sweater.
Which, an odd metaphor, or quite similar. I never thought of a boat and a woman.
Really? You could
That's
have
what's called she.
They're both called she, that's because they're temperamentally.
Let me get out of the way.
That's an old canard, sorry.
That's not the resist, but they're smooth,
Well, in their own way, I think he's getting at shapely.
Yeah, I know.
She's in good trim. She's got a good shape. She's built for action kind of thing.
Yes.
That's what I got out of that metaphor. And
Move fast.
yeah, and Brett is what we would consider, I think, a liberated woman because she's obviously having non-marital sex with a bunch of guys, not just one or so. So she's part of the gang, but she is her own entity within them.
Yeah.
I'd like to ask, do you think Brett can love anybody?
No. I didn't.
No,
To me, she was the most lost.
Yeah.
Most sympathetic, least
Least
sympathetic.
sympathetic, but most lost.
She was almost a strong woman. You set her up there to fail in a lot of ways, I
Yeah.
thought.
To me, she was almost like a caricature.
Yeah.
She
Well, a lot
was-
of the characters in this book are characters.
Yeah.
But she's particular.
Yeah.
She's like to the extreme.
Mm.
To think that it's 1920.
wasn't there an allusion, some part of the book of her being very damaged by her first marriage? There was some section that just alluded to that very briefly. And I thought, oh, okay, I'm supposed to accept that as the explanation for her being the way she is. But it didn't develop any, maybe it didn't need to develop any more than that. It was just kind of thrown out there. I don't know if anybody else remembers that
Yeah.
little squib.
I do. She was abused.
Yeah.
I think originally there was in the first before Fitzgerald told Hemmingway to cut it. It was a lot of explanation about Brett. The first time, but he got all of that.
Okay. I think everybody except Jake just gets the minimum backstory that they need to move on in the story. So we don't, and Cohen, of course, we get a lot of backstory on Cohen, but almost everybody else is, Bill was a book editor or whatever he was in New York, and Mike was he was an English guy who was in the war, the one that Brett takes up with in part 2. So Jake's not the only soldier, but we don't get a lot of background on anybody really except Jake and Cohen.
Yeah. Why or how does Cohen fit in as like oil to Jake?
I think Bill said, he's the guy that can do everything that Jake would want to, but can't quite do everything that Cohen can.
Is there anything, there are multiple answers here. Is Cohen Jewish in any other descriptive way other than Jake just says he's Jewish?
His name.
His name.
His name appears to be a Jewish
Yeah.
name, but my name appears to be a Jewish name. So,
But back in that time, he went to Princeton, correct?
Yeah.
And they didn't let a lot of ethnic people.
no,
No.
no.
So,
And his-
that's one point.
And his mother gave him money, which
Yeah,
also.
he came from a wealthy family.
How did he stay out of the war? Was that ever addressed?
I don't think so.
I don't know why it matters to me, but it's kind of strange.
Well, don't forget, it was a volunteer force. They didn't-
No, there was a draft.
Was it draft?
Well, sure.
Oh, I didn't know.
Yeah, there were draft riots.
Well, one of
The
the-
rich have always stayed out.
Yes, they find ways.
The
I
other
don't know, I
thing he
found
says
the way, and I
about-
wasn't so rich.
the other thing he says about Robert is that his nose was broken,
And it made it better.
and it made
Oh,
it better. And so, maybe what he's standing in for is, here's somebody that everyone knows is Jewish, but doesn't have any of the markers of being Jewish. So it's like, is this something that they therefore can ignore and accept him wholly? Or is the thing that they can't see still there? Just like with Jake, the thing they can't see is still there. It's kind of
That's scary.
setting up whether people can interact with what they actually experience, or whether the ideas they have in their head drive what they feel about other people.
I think it's clear that everybody is well aware that Cohen is Jewish and that Jake is wounded. So as you say, even though it's not visible, they're aware of it, and it's an undertone to almost everything that happens, I think.
I guess my question is like, does Robert's being Jewish affect his own behavior? Like, is he Jewish other than,
Do anything.
yeah, does he do anything that reflects his being Jewish?
Wait, what can you do then?
I don't know.
Well, I mean,
You go to synagogue, but.
He could go to synagogue, he could say something about observing the Sabbath or not eating pork.
Right.
Or
You know,
say something about money that, I don't know, there are a million, like, really awful stereotypical things he could have done. But to my thinking, I don't think he does anything. I think the only way that we signify him as being Jewish is from other people saying he is.
But there's also in the background of him, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead, Glenna.
Oh, well, I was just thinking that I thought that Cohen was drawn to be navigating through life in a privileged way.
Okay.
But, you know, I don't know if that was an allusion to Judaism or if it was an allusion to Princeton. But he seemed to, you know, take privileges for granted.
Can you go into that a little deeper?
I don't know. Did that resonate with anybody else?
I think Hemingway needed an anti-hero, and it was easy.
Right, yeah, exactly. I think so too. I think you needed someone in the book to be viewed as a villain. And his being Jewish and his being with Brett duly made him the negative character.
And if you remember in the 20s, the Klan was
Yeah.
Still there.
radicalized, and they were
They were
very
friends.
aggressive.
Yeah. And the other signifier of it is, I always, in almost everything that they say about Cohen, he's defensive. So it's like he's, you know, and I think it's something explicit from his time at Princeton, but throughout the rest of the book, he seems like he's being defensive about something, and it's either the money, the Princeton, or the Jewishness, or some combination.
He took our
Right,
boxing.
he says like,
Right.
take it back, take it back. And that one conversation he had with Jake where they're,
If he wasn't Jewish, he would be the star of this book. He was an end on a football team at Princeton. He
Yeah.
was a middleweight champion. He was a good-looking guy with a good nose now. He would have been the star.
yeah.
He was everything Hemingway wanted to be.
Published author.
Yeah,
But he was led around by women,
Great tennis player.
like Hemingway.
which it was
Yeah,
a
makes it
problem.
even more so.
Yeah, he married a lot of strong women who brought him along.
Yeah.
Including Patton, who was married to him, who wrote this
yeah.
one. Screwed her over, but she made that book happen.
Who was? Pauline?
Oh,
Yeah.
took him away from her.
Oh, yeah. Let's
She
look at,
didn't last very long.
let's look at it from that angle for a minute. In what way is this like a thinly veiled autobiography? Like, how does,
What's the thin part? I mean, he went on this trip, he wrote about it,
okay,
almost as a diary.
yeah.
And since he pissed off everybody who went on that trip, it had to be fairly true.
Oh,
I don't think there's anything thin about this. I think Hemingway wrote about his life.
do you think that's true with all of his novels or just the one? I know that's neither here nor there, but
Well, everybody writes about, who writes about their life. in
that's
some way.
true.
But this, I think, is the most autobiographical. I think I've read all his books.
Is anyone familiar with In Our Time? The collection that came out before this book? No? Okay. Never mind.
I read it since about 1972 or something.
Oh, okay.
The Miss Thomas.
But that's a brilliant book about talking about what's going on in his life right now, right there now.
Yeah, yeah. So he gives first person character who was very much like him, grew up in Upper Michigan.
Does anybody see any parallel between Robert and Jake? Or Hemingway, I should say, because Hemingway was a boxer. He was a published author. He was women were attracted to him. And, you know, I see a little bit of parallels there, you know. He used to hold boxing matches all the time. So I don't know where the boxing came in, whether he was a boxer before that. But when he was down at Key West, he used to hold boxing matches down there all the time.
Yeah, and Sloppy Joe's, right? He would,
Well, yeah, they used to have a place called the Blue, I forget what it's called, Blue something or other. They used to set up a boxing range there and get people in from around town and have boxing matches.
Well, it seems to me that if people don't know anything else about Hemingway, they know that he went around doing manly boxing and, you know, all that kind of stuff.
Fishing.
And they know that he was depressed and committed suicide. So in a way, it's like he set two parts of himself up as different characters in this book and let them fight it out.
It's a good point.
in what way do you think Jake was an avatar for Hemingway? Like, do you think Jake was someone that, in a way, Hemingway wanted to be?
But he didn't want to be not manly,
True.
so he wouldn't have wanted that part of Jake's life in any way.
Yeah, he was very defensive about, I'm not impotent. Like, even in the quote that I had you read, like, he said, no, he's really a man. He's still a man.
He's spending a lot of time thinking about that.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's very dangerous to take information that you have about an author's life and read into too much. But Hemingway, his mother raised him as a girl.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm not,
Dressed
yeah,
him,
I don't know.
dressed him in girls' clothes till he was 6 or 7 years
Yeah.
old.
The,
And in his
he
later
was-
life, he started thinking about dressing as a woman. So you have
Really?
one.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know, it's all against
You
the.
gotta watch the Ken Burns thing.
Yeah, I gotta go back and watch it again.
It's against
At least
everything
part
that you
one.
think about. Well, you know, maybe that's why he's impotent here, I don't know.
Well, there's rumors out there that he was bisexual. And he might have been trying to push his masculinity because he didn't want to see his other side.
Compensation.
Yeah, compensation. So, yeah, those rumors were going on for quite a while. He always used to hang around with men. I mean, he used to go fishing trips with them. He used to go on camping trips with them. You know, he went on safaris. So,
That's something we'll definitely get into next week in part two. It's fishing trip with
What's interesting, you chose Elliot, who was asexual,
yeah.
had a relationship with a woman by letter for 30 years, and then when he had the chance to be with her, said no. So, maybe they're.
Yeah. Let's go back to Hemingway's twinning with his sister. His mother would dress him up, he and his sister, and pretend they were twins. That's the whole dressing as a girl thing. In what ways does his bisexuality, responsible bisexuality, come in part one?
Eyes all the time. Alluding, well, he comments about how, what a great tennis player Robert was, and how, talks about his form, his body and his build and his strength. But that's also just a fact of Robert.
In the message that I sent out to you all, the email, man, I'm terrible at lecturing. So what I wrote about was Hemingway's influence of Freud. And like the tennis racket and the fitting ball as like alluded sort of replacement of the talent is what I'm getting at.
Sometimes a cigar is just a cigar.
But there is a lot of I have a couple of books about it.
Sam, if we're going to go there, and I didn't think we were going to go there about, kind of analyzing Hemingway, but you just kind of opened the door a little bit.
Oh, yeah.
In my mind, if Jake is Hemingway and Jake is okay with Brett having sex with all of these different people, and in fact, he facilitates one of them, the bullfighter, is this an aspect of the personality that, allows him to explore this bisexuality vicariously? Through Brett, he's enjoying these relationships with these different men.
That's a good point, yes.
Interesting.
Does he set up an opportunity to watch, though? I mean, no.
No, I don't think it goes that far.
But there is a quote where he says, I often imagine the bedroom scenes of my friends.
Oh, yes.
In part one.
Yes.
And he admitted it.
Yeah.
Rereading that part last.
So there is some truth to that, Sharon.
And if you look at the wives, except for Martha Gellhorn, I thought all of the wives were very masculine, and he immediately pulled them into his world. What was the last one? Mary. I mean, she had to hunt and she had to fish, and he pulled these women into the things he liked to do. And that's just my opinion, has no anything behind it at all, except my just looking at these women and saying, wow, Martha Gellhorn was pretty good looking, but the rest of them are masculine looking to me.
The Hadley was masculine.
Well, because of the time period, I think it was really hard to tell because she got stuck with that, kind of 1920s look. Yes, yeah, I do.
What I think it was Gellhorn that Hemingway asked her first to go there and then dye it blonde because that's what he thought was attractive. What other? Never mind. I don't want to go too far down that road.
I think it's interesting that this book is mostly first-person narration, which is sort of a big jump.
Okay.
Right?
Hemingway said that American literature began with Huck Finn. What do you think he meant?
Again, with what, I'm sorry.
Huck Finn.
Began
Huck
with
Finn,
Huck
sorry, thank you.
Well, one reason was the use of vernacular language.
Okay.
Can someone repeat that? Began with what?
Huck Finn.
Huck Finn, okay.
Yeah, I can't read.
Well, that's first person. Once he gets on the raft, it's first person.
Well, it's first person, but it's also from the point of view of a really marginalized character. Do you think Jake is marginalized?
No.
Not to a degree, because he's apart from everybody else. I don't know if marginalized as much as separate.
Okay.
He's white, he's got a job, he's successful somewhat in his genre. I mean, he's a successful newspaper man. I mean, he's not black, he's not a woman, he's not Hispanic, he's not any of the groups, he's not a Jew, he's not any of the groups that we think of typically as marginalized. He's damaged from the war.
Right.
But that, at the time, I would have thought would have been kind of a badge of honor that he had served and he had been wounded. I don't see him as marginalized, but that's me.
I grew up.
Norfolk?
So if you lived in Philadelphia or Boston or New York after World War II, you saw all these people without legs pushing themselves along the sidewalk. They had no badges at all.
See, I mean, I grew up in a Navy town. I grew up around
Yeah.
military where anybody who served had like a gold star on their forehead because they'd been in the military. That was just the way I was.
I wouldn't see his wound, his specific wound as a badge of honor, because if you didn't know him, you didn't know he was wounded.
Yeah.
And when you knew him, I mean, nobody really wanted to talk about it, or,
Yeah.
so I didn't see it as a badge of honor.
I think there was a lot of what Trump said about McCain, that, it's okay to serve as long as you come back whole, undamaged.
All right, captured.
Yeah, right.
So what did
McCain was
Trump
both
say?
captured and damaged.
Yeah, the reason he's a warrior is because of camp.
Then what?
He's a warrior because he was
Captured.
Yeah, because he was.
Right. And then didn't he go on to say, I like my heroes not to be captured?
Yeah, exactly.
Something else.
The point is whether you feel like you're separate in your mind. This could be expanded to anyone. You don't necessarily have to be in a certain group to feel marginalized.
Right.
And, maybe Brett's marginalized because she's been abused. Maybe, some of the other characters that you would say, oh, they're in the upper class, they're fine and everything like that. But because they're living in a world that is being turned upside down, that makes them marginalized.
But if we take that as the bar, then all of us could be marginalized. That kind of does away with the idea of actually being a marginal person in my mind.
Right, if everyone has it, then it doesn't make any difference.
Everybody's got something.
A 30-year-old man who's impotent is different.
True.
That is life-changing.
But I
But
say,
it's not
what I'm
visible.
getting at
Right.
is the sense of, you can have empathy for them because they don't necessarily have to be in a certain group. Everybody has that feeling at some point in their lives of being on the outside.
Yeah, I mean.
So everybody has that sense at some point, not necessarily their whole life and not necessarily,
Absolutely.
being treated differently, but.
I don't mean to bring it up now because we only have 5 minutes, but in the beginning of part 1, when Jake picks up Georgette and she goes to touch she says, are you sick? And he says, yes. And either we're all saying, so am I. What does that mean? That everyone
Everyone is sick.
Yeah.
That's kind of what I think I'm kind of tiptoeing around here, is that everybody has a little bit of sickness in them.
Yeah.
Though I think probably the direct thing he's talking to is that everybody has, venereal disease because of the war.
Right.
They're all damaged goods, right?
All damaged goods, yeah.
Yeah. It's probably not generation. They were all lost.
The whole world was.
Yeah.
Down to it.
Okay. Well, I think we are calling that. I'll send out another email, kind of send the signing or what, to get ready for next.
What do you want to cover next time?
A part 2.
Understand?
No, we'll get back to that in the third. All right. Thank you very much.
Thanks to the people on Zoom too.
Yeah.
Thank you.